There's many of us that never had a chance to tell our stories, to go through the healing process, and many of us have lost our families, our communities, our language, our culture, and there's many of the people that died of alcohol overdose and addictions and suicide and or murdered. We have initiated Creating Hope for the Future to carry forward a healing process commencing from the residential school survivors to those who are products of child welfare system that perpetuates a legacy of the residential school. And I spoken to some members who were in residential school, and they had disclosed to me that right after residential school they were placed in foster homes, so they never had that time to go into their communities or even meeting their families, and they've lost completely touch. And 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 the more that I talked about this, some elders believe we're in the fifth generation of child welfare.
I've been in foster care since I was 9 months old. I've been in the same foster home since I graduated from grade 12, age 18. The way that I felt and the way the story I understood was that they were alcoholics and they chose alcohol over me, and that's how I felt growing up, that alcohol was more important than giving me a life. My sister Joan and I ended up staying at the same home for a number of years. But when she was around 15, 16, she had run away from the home. There was some amount of abuse in the home, and when the first time she ran away, she had met some gentlemen, and she had gotten pregnant, and and then social services or whoever found her again and brought her back. She ended up staying there throughout her pregnancy, but social services, I guess just because of her age, maybe because she's a foster child, I'm not too sure, had made the decision that that child would be given up for adoption. Ever since then, that she had to give up her child. She wasn't the same. After then, she ran away again, and she was in numerous youth detention centers and group homes, and then eventually ended up on the street. When she was about 21, they found her remains. Actually, a group of students doing summer cleanup found her remains along the Edmonton River. That would, I guess, was a pretty hard time for me. I don't know, because, as growing up, there was me, and then there was my sister, and I'm sitting here today, and she isn't. And I don't know if there's just certain strengths in people, or I can't really answer how I end up being here. And the fact that my brother and my sister aren't, I just don't know. in all actuality, I didn't know Richard. I knew that he was my brother, and that I actually did meet him once, him and my brother Charlie. We were set up a visit on the weekend, on this one weekend, and I did meet him, and Richard was this like goofy kind of character, I felt. You know, he was always just like real goofy. I don't know how else to explain it. But one thing I remember about Richard is at the end of the visit, before him and Charlie about ready to get onto the bus, was I asked him there, I was just like, are you always this goofy? Are you always just like this? And then all of a sudden, I don't know, there was all of a sudden this change in him. All of a sudden he just went blank, and he had this, I don't know, dead look to him, like this hollow look to him. And I don't know, it was so weird, and that's how he got onto the bus, and that's how he left, with that just blankness of him. And I don't know, to this day, I still can see that look, and you know, and it freaked me out. It's like, whoa, you know, like this guy just so different, like from just being this goofy kind of kid to all of a sudden just real dark and blank. And then after reading his story, they had a story in the newspaper there, and after reading his story and also seeing the films, I could see and understand where that emptiness and that darkness came from. I myself today, if I had to go through that, what he had to go through, you know, today I don't even think I would be here today either. Oh, one of his stories was he was in a basement where there was dirt and the water ran down there, and he was only given like potatoes or stuff to eat, and you know, we're humans. Like, I don't know how social services believe that was better. I don't know. I don't feel that I ever healed, and I don't think I ever will. Like, sure, I don't know. I'll carry on, but I don't think I'll ever heal. When I went to detox and I started to learn, but from the elder there, about round dances, sweat lodges, the Creator, and following your path in life. It started to make a lot of sense to me. Going into a sweat lodge, I really found a great way to release a lot of stuff inside me, and through prayer, and it was good. It was good, and that's probably the first time I really understood the Native culture and the Native ways, and it helped me started healing in a way.
And as a child, my adoption papers, somebody had wrote my last name in and then scribbled it out. So a lot of my years was like holding it up to the light and trying to read the words, you know, look at the other side. And I made out Provost, and it turned out that my last name was Provost. And it was just the person at Indian Affairs said, you know, you're not registered under Schoen. Do you have any idea what your last name is? And I said Provost, and she was like, oh, Provost. And sure enough, I was there. And so we just started calling around to Provost down there, and that's how I met my birth mother and then my birth father. I traveled down to Lethbridge and I met them. And I stayed there for like about a week and then came back. And about 6 months later, I met my father. And it caused a big rift in his family because I was a secret. And my mother's side, my sisters always knew about me, so I was more accepted with them. But because of that street life that I had already lived, made me really kind of crazy and hard to accept, you know. I think probably from their point of view, and from Eric's family, I was like his daughter from hell coming back to haunt him, and you know, and myself, I was just this very wounded person. She was 14 when she had me. My father was 15. My mother was a product of residential school. Because she was so young, they didn't seek out, and at that time they didn't seek out extended family. My grandmother on my father's side had wanted to raise me, but I guess Children's Services just went to the hospital and took me. You know, there's a lot of tragedy in my mother's side of the family because her mother, Florence, who I'm named after, she died of leukemia when she was 32, and she had 7 children, my mother one of them, and so they ended up in residential school. You know, even when kids were allowed to go home to visit, they were still at the residential school. And then when they did return back to the home, by the time that she was pregnant with me at her age of 14, because her mother had passed away, they were living with the grandmother, my great-grandmother, who already had her children and her family, and then 7 more children. So, and it's on the reserve, and there's poverty, and it's the reserve area, and it's the late 60s. I had to go to the hospital for something, and I know my great-grandmother just wouldn't let her go to pick me up, and that's when Children's Services took me, and I ended up in a foster home in Pincher Creek, which is right next to my reserve, till I was 5. But I don't have good memories of that place, and I remember like really kind of humiliating experiences, the few ones that I do have of there. And actually this past summer, I was in Pincher Creek and I was with my son, and me and my sister tried to find that house a lot of times and I could never find it. And I was with my son and we turned around this corner and all of a sudden it was right there. And I recognized it immediately. And I told my son, I had to share it. We just stopped and we parked outside and I told him that story. I knew the whole layout of the house and where the room that I was in. And I remember that foster mother being really mean. You know, one memory I have is I know that I wasn't allowed to come inside one time. And I think I was hanging around outside. And I was outside long enough for the neighbor across the street to come walking across the street and ask me if I was okay. Like I said, there was a lot of really heaviness. I'm actually glad. I mean, I wanted to be a part of the circles, but I think if I would have, it would have just opened a floodgate for me, you know, that would have maybe been a good thing. But really what I wanted to do when people came into the room was just be able to just, I would talk a bit about the paint and how the paint works, you know, and then just basically let them pick their colors and go and do whatever they want. There was one man that came in and he was going to sit down and he was really starting to put some thought into what he was planning on the canvas. And then a whole group came in and he decided to go out, and I told him, you're going to still paint, aren't you? And he was like, yeah, I'll just wait. And he waited, and when he came back and everybody had gone again, he sat down and he really took his time with what he was doing. He was explaining it to me afterwards, and he was saying, this is really about, the hole that I had in my heart, and there was just so much that he was talking about that one spot that he painted. If you give each person the chance to come up and say why they chose what they did, and there are some, each one has a story, and each one, there was a reason why they did what they did.
When I found my real family, that was back in '91 when I was going to college in Fanshawe, London, Ontario. And that was when Oka was happening, and that actually started inspiring me to really start searching. And then so I went to the Children's Aid Society, and a lady, Ruth, there helped me, and literally almost 9 months to the day that I went in there, I gave birth to a family that was humongously huge. My biological parents are alive. 2 years ago, I buried my grandmother of 116. She was dated when she was 12 to be January 1st, 1900. The Europeans gave her that birthday, but she was already 12 at that point. She was at signing of Treaty 10. And my white family, which is no longer alive for my white parents, they told me that my real parents didn't want me, didn't care for me, they were alcoholic and they couldn't take care of me, which throughout the years was a bane to me. My white father was in Army service, so we got shipped around the first 14 years of my life. So for the first 14 years of my life, for every first day I went to school, I knew I was coming home punched out, because I was always ended up being the only Aboriginal person in the base, on the base schools. Whenever I made any little friends, it was great at school, but as soon as they took me home to their house to play, their parents would shoo me away saying, we don't want any dirty little Indian boys or girls in our house, go home. Without them realizing that I was a foster child. I used to come home from school, it didn't matter where we were, what province we were in, what time of the year it was. If I seen that green station wagon with the symbol of CFS on the side of it, I froze. Because my mother used to keep me in line by saying, if you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to phone the welfare worker up and they'll take you away and throw you back to the Indian people that didn't like you. It was just me and my white mother, Joyce, that were in the house at the time. And I asked her, I says, how come you never legally adopted me if you say I'm your daughter? And she had the audacity to say to me, you're nothing but a mortgage payment, always have been, always will be. I left a week later. That money came directly to me, and they did lose the house. They moved to a trailer. Unfortunately, it wasn't the most happiest moments of my life when I went home, was because of the decimation of what happened to my family after me and my sister were taken. The family almost fell apart. And when I met my father, I think it was about 2 years later, my sister Nancy was living in Thompson, and I was down there to visit for a bit. And my father was also in town, and he had to have a 26 of beer in him before he could tell me the truth. And that's how he handled it, of what happened when I was taken. Now, from what I found out from him, and I let him speak, was that he was threatened with jail time if they didn't sign me over. Every time I seen my parents, there was always this wall between us. We had, throughout the years I was up there, a few good moments, but there was always that barrier, and it tore me apart, that they couldn't forgive themselves for something that they were victimized for, and I was victimized of the government scoop. And I says, if you want me to forgive you, I'll forgive you, but I have nothing to forgive you for. I'm here now, and I'm your daughter. And you're not going to be on earth that much longer. You're getting up there in age. Be my parents now. And I wrote this all in this 6-page letter, and I never got no response from it, which they just lived up the hill from my house. I did my best to be in the family, but then again, the overwhelming sense of rejection was there. And when I looked at that, it broke me. The only time I went back, like I said, was a year ago when I had to bury my late sister, who was, like I said, a year older than I am. She was 45, or 44. I was 43 at the time. And I'm that it's going to be a big debate when word comes in that one of my biological parents is gone, whether I go back or not for that. I am leaning towards no.
I was part of the scoop. May 4th, 1969, I was born. I was kept for a while. My mother was in a residential school. She hid the pregnancy, and then she gave birth to me. One night she woke the nuns up and said, "I'm having a baby." And I said, and she said, they rushed her to the hospital. The nun says, "No possible way." They rushed her and she gave birth, and she never came back to the residential school. Then, because I had a child on my own birthday, 27 years later, I gave birth on May 4th, 96. And I actually recounted because there's been, misconception. I was told one thing, that it was a father, then possibly, might have been a priest. To me, it doesn't matter who my father is. God the Father, the Creator, that's exactly, that's all that matters. A lot of, like the abuse she went through and the way she is today, all I can say is for that part, I'm very thankful, that I have a mother who loves me. I was apprehended. She gave me away, because she had no choice. What help was there in 1969? There was no help. They kicked her out of school. There was no education. I don't know how much they received for welfare. You can't admit that there's something wrong in 1969 or they would have taken your child. I have that understanding. But, she loves me. I know she loves me now because she'd do anything for me. But there is still, that hurt, that anger, I don't feel, like there's a gap. And there always will be, but that's fine, That part I'm accepting, and slowly we accept. Mother, yes, I feel honored, that she accepted me into her life. She was waiting till I turned 18. And, the day I turned 18, I gave her a dingle, And you know what? The tribe that I'm from, which is Enoch Cree Nation, they have accepted me. I had 3 children by the time I was 20. I married a Frenchman from Quebec. And it was like I'd been back with my reserve, reunited with my mother, And I was right into going back to school. That was my gear, because I didn't finish grade 9, I finished grade 8. And my marriage just broke up. And I tell you, then my husband decided he wanted half of everything about a year later. And I drank. I was so crushed. And after my dad passed away, my adopted family, we didn't reunite. We kept in touch, but even my brothers, the one brother they had themselves, my adopted parents, and then my other adopted brother, we just, for me, I just didn't feel a part of it. And I didn't want to go home because, I had to find myself. And for me, something was missing, and I was searching very frantically. I had these children, and I was not going to let them go through, I guess, the pain, the yearning for something, And I did put my children through child welfare, through my neglect of leaving them with babysitters while I drank. I went to treatment. It would have been after that year I went to treatment in Beaver Lake. I'll never forget it because I had my kids apprehended. And it wasn't even meant to be. It was just so uncanny. I had already booked me and my family in that treatment center before that even happened. And what had happened was they got apprehended. I phoned, and I just went to treatment anyways. I had so much baggage. It was dragging me down into this cesspool of problems. It was like I was in a big hole in the floor, in the earth, and I was just. Every time I'd get out, it was like I was getting out of it. Something was pulling me back. That's the only way I can describe it. And for me, I guess compassion is what I developed. Because before my dad passed away, he did apologize, for these different things. He never sexually abused me, but, the physical abuse and the mental and the, that was spiritual. Is all I can say is, I came through it, and I didn't do it to my children, but I did develop addictions. So I was there and I was going to these sweats, because I went to a sweat once or twice when I first came back to the reserve, but I thought I was gonna die in there. But all I can say is how I can describe it. It was like I was being resuscitated. I was like dead, walking on earth almost. And it was like I was, the Creator, God, the one of all, He was blowing life back into me, blowing, resuscitating me like I had drowned it in my sorrows or in the pain or in life. And when I came out of there, I'll tell you, there is some healing. He goes, I'll tell you medicine. He goes, the strongest medicine comes out of our mouth, whether it be good or bad. He goes, that is the strongest medicine. It's what comes out. And you know what? That for me, I'm trying to live that way. What we say, how we create and what comes out. And I'm a firm believer in that, now. And for me, that medicine circle, it affirms it, this whole conference, of this weekend, is that that's the way. The red, the black, the white, the yellow, and the center, the Creator. And that's why, that's how I believe, and I really appreciate you, having me share.